At 20 years old, all Wes Coyle inherited from his father was 40 acres of cracked dirt, a leaning cabin, and a dead well the whole town had laughed about for years. His uncle owned the green bottomland a mile below. Wes owned a hole in the ground and a name people said with pity. He came to sign the papers and sell it. But the night before he did, he pried the cover off that so-called dry well, dropped a stone to hear the bottom, and the sound that came back wasn't 60 feet of dry rock. It was water. And it was something else, something his father had spent the last 11 years of his life building down there in the dark, where man had no business being at all. That was the night before, though. To understand why a stone dropped in a well could stop a young man's heart, you have to go back 3 days, to the afternoon Wes first drove up the rutted road to the one piece of the world his father had left him. The truck was his, and it wasn't. He had bought it for $1,100 off a man at the warehouse where he worked nights, and the clutch slipped on every grade, and the road up to the land was nothing but grade. Wes ground the gears into first and let the truck crawl. Dust came up gold in the low sun behind him. When the cabin finally showed itself at the top of the rise, he almost laughed because it was worse than he had pictured, and he had pictured it bad. The roof sagged in the middle like something had sat down on it. A dead windmill leaned over a stock tank full of nothing but dust, and one flat basketball. The porch had pulled away from the house so you could see daylight under the front door, and all around it, in every direction, the ground ran the color of an old scab, cracked into plates you could have lifted like puzzle pieces. A mile below, down the long green slope, his uncle's land was another country. Wes could see it from the porch, hay so thick it looked wet, sprinkler lines throwing silver in the sun, black cattle standing in shade. The two properties had been one ranch once, split between two brothers, and looking at them side by side, you would have thought God handed one brother the garden and the other brother the parking lot. Wes was not a boy who cried easily, and he did not cry now. He just stood on the broken porch and did the math. He had been doing his whole life. His father had chosen this. A man could have sold this rock and moved to town and been a father. His had picked 40 acres of nothing instead. His mother's voice was in it, as it always was. She had said it to him more times than he could count. Usually late, usually after a bad phone call that had nothing to do with Wes at all. "Your daddy loves that hole in the ground more than he ever loved us," she used to say. "You remember that, baby. Some men marry dirt." Wes had been 6 when she packed the two of them into a hatchback and drove 90 miles to the city and never looked back. He remembered almost nothing of the man. A big rough hand on the back of his neck, the smell of well water and cut alfalfa, a voice that did not talk much. That was the whole of it. 14 birthdays had come and gone. And Wes could not have told you the color of his own father's eyes. Now the man was dead. A heart attack, alone, found 2 days later by the mail carrier. There had been a service in a small brick church with maybe 9 people in it, and Wes had sat in the back and felt like a stranger at a stranger's funeral, which is what it was. A lawyer had handed him a folder. 40 acres, free and clear. A dead well. Come sign, and it is yours to sell. So here he was. The dog found him before he found the dog. Wes was hauling his duffel bag toward the porch when something moved at the edge of his eye, low and fast, and then went still. He turned. A blue heeler stood 20 feet off, gray in the muzzle, ribs showing through a coat gone dull, watching him with the flat yellow eyes of an animal that had made its own arrangements with the world. One ear stood up, the other had a piece missing. "Easy," Wes said. "Easy now." The dog did not come and did not run. It held its ground between Wes and a low round shape of fieldstone off to the side of the cabin, and Wes understood without being told that the stone thing was what the dog was guarding, not the house. He would learn later that the neighbor down the road had been driving up twice a week to leave food, and that the dog ate it and would not be caught, and would not leave, and slept every night curled against the cold stone lip of the old well. "You his?" Wes asked. The dog's tail moved once, low, and stopped. Wes left it alone. He had enough to deal with without a half-wild animal that clearly had opinions. He went inside, into the smell of dust and mouse and cold ash, and he stood in the middle of his dead father's one room and felt absolutely nothing, and hated that he felt nothing, which is its own kind of grief, though nobody warns you about that one. Wes drove into town the next morning because the cabin had no coffee, and he could not think without it. The town was one long street with angled parking, and a grain elevator standing over the whole thing like it was still 1955. There was a feed store with a lunch counter built into one end of it, and that was where Wes ended up, on a cracked vinyl stool, in front of a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and flour on her forearms. "Coffee," he said. "Please. Just coffee." She poured it and set it down and looked at him a beat too long. "You'd be Hollis's boy." Wes felt his shoulders come up. "I'd be selling Hollis's land is what I'd be." The woman did not blink. Marlene, she said, tapping her own chest, I've run this counter since before you were born. Your daddy sat right where you're sitting every Thursday. Coffee, black, and a slice of whatever pie was oldest, because he said the old pie needed a home too. She almost smiled. He tipped like a rich man and dressed like a scarecrow. That sounds about right, Wes said. The scarecrow part. Something moved across Marlene's face, and she leaned back from the counter. You want to be careful, she said quietly, talking about a man you never gave yourself the chance to know. I knew enough. Wes wrapped both hands around the mug. I knew he stayed up on that rock while my mother worked doubles. That's about all the knowing I needed. Marlene let it sit. Then she said in a lower voice, There's things about your father this town got wrong. I got some of them wrong myself for a while. She pulled a rag along the clean counter, but a man can't argue with a whole town, and Hollis quit trying a long time ago. He just went on up that hill and did whatever it was he did up there. She looked at Wes. You go easy on the selling. Land like that remembers who let it go. Wes did not know what to say to that, so he drank his coffee and left $3 for a $1 cup, because he was his father's son whether he liked it or not, and some things run in the blood without asking permission. His uncle came to him that same afternoon. Wes heard the vehicle before he saw it, a big diesel pickup climbing the grade without any trouble at all, the way a truck climbs when its clutch works and its owner has money. It parked in the yard and a tall man got out, 60 or so, silver hair under a clean cap, a canvas jacket that had never done a day of actual work. He walked up to the porch with his hand already out and a smile already on, and Wes felt himself being handled before the man said one word. Wesley, his uncle said, warm as a stove. Look at you. Last I saw you, you were knee-high. Garrett, I'm your daddy's brother. I know who you are. Wes shook the hand because you shake the hand. I am sick about all this, Garrett said, and he did look it. Or looked close enough. Hollis and me, we had our distances. Brothers do. But blood is blood, and you are the only coil left carrying the name, and I want you to know you are not alone up here. Appreciate it, Wes said. Garrett turned and looked out over the cracked ground with a sad, fond expression, like a man at a graveside. He loved this place, he said. God knows why. Your granddad split the ranch between us and Hollis. He took the high piece. His choice. Always his choice. He shook his head. But it's no place for a young man to carry. Taxes, and that well long dry, and no water you could raise a weed on. It'll bleed you, son. Land like this only takes. Here it comes, Wes thought. So let me take it off you, Garrett said gently. Right on cue. Family price. I'll square the back taxes, I'll pay you fair, and you go back to your life with money in your pocket instead of a millstone. I already had my man draw the papers. He patted the folder under his arm. You could sleep in a real bed tomorrow night in the city and let your old uncle worry about the rock. It was a good offer. It was a fast offer. It was the offer of a man who wanted the thing before the person selling it had time to think. And even a tired boy of 20 who had never bought or sold anything bigger than a truck could feel the speed of it, the little push under the kindness. I'll think on it, Wes said. For just a second, something flickered behind Garrett's smile, there and gone, like a fish turning underwater. Then the warmth came back over it. Course you will, he said. Course. No rush at all. He was already walking to his truck. You call me when you're ready. And don't you sign anything for anybody else. This is a family matter. We keep it family. The diesel pulled away down the hill, easy as anything, and Wes stood there and watched the dust settle and thought, for the first time, that a man in that much of a hurry to buy a worthless rock might not think the rock was worthless. But he was tired, and grief he did not understand was sitting on him sideways, and he pushed the thought away and went inside to start the sad work of going through a dead stranger's things. The cabin did not match the story he had been told about the man who lived in it. That was what kept snagging him as he worked. A drunk's cabin should have bottles somewhere, and Wes did not find a single one. What he found instead were books, more than he had ever owned, stacked on planks and cinder blocks along one whole wall. Not novels. Books about rock. Books about water moving under the ground, with library cards still in their sleeves and due dates going back years. Like the man had simply kept them and paid the fines forever. The margins were crowded with small, hard handwriting. Above the plank desk, tacked to the boards, were maps. Not road maps. Wes had never seen the like. They were drawn by hand in pencil, layer over layer, curved lines and numbers and little arrows all pointing down into the earth. And in the corner of each, one the same, 2 words sat underlined twice. He did not know yet what they meant. He would. On the desk itself stood a row of clean jam jars, each one holding a different color of dirt or crushed stone, each one labeled in that same pressed hard hand with a depth. 10 feet, 20, 40. The last jar was marked 60, and it was empty. and its lid lay beside it as though the man had meant to fill it and had run clean out of time. A drunk does not label jars. A drunk does not read 3 counties dry of books about groundwater. Wes stood there with the lantern and looked at what must have been years of somebody's careful secret work, and none of it fit the man his mother had described, and the not fitting of it wore on him worse than the whole long day had. He found the box near midnight. It was under the bed, a cardboard apple box gone soft at the corners, and inside it, held together with a rubber band that broke when he touched it, was a stack of envelopes. 14 of them. Each one had a number written where a stamp should go. 7, 8, 9, on up to 20. None had ever been mailed. Wes sat down on the plank floor and opened the one marked 7. And it was a birthday card, a cheap one from a drugstore rack, a cartoon cowboy on the front. Inside, in a hand that pressed so hard it had almost gone through the paper, his father had written, "Happy birthday, son. I don't know where they mail these to anymore. I'll keep them here till you come." Then some words scratched out, and then just, "Your dad." Wes opened the next and the next. They were all like that. Short, awkward, a man who did not have the words trying to use them anyway, year after year, into a silence. Some had a dollar folded inside, gone soft with age. One, from a year Wes must have been about 11, said only, "I saw a boy your size at the fair today and had to leave. I'm sorry. I hope your mother is treating you kind." His throat had gone tight in a way he did not have permission for. These men do not get to reach you from a cardboard box under a bed. That is not how it is supposed to work. He opened the last one, 20. The one meant for a birthday that was still 4 months off, a birthday his father had not lived to see. It was the shortest of all. It said, "Wesley, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are here. And that is the only order it could ever happen in, and I'm sorry for that too. There is no money in this one. I put it somewhere safer. Everything I owe you is down that well. Go and see. Your dad, Hollis." Wes read it 4 times. "Everything I owe you is down that well." He knew what the town would say. He had heard it already, secondhand the story that the Coyle brother who got the high ground had lost his mind by the end, that he used to sit at Marlene's counter and tell anybody who would listen that his fortune was down a dry hole, and that people had learned to nod and change the subject. A drunk's riddle. A crazy man's map to nothing. Wes almost put the card in the burn barrel with the rest of the junk. His hand was already moving toward the door. But the dog was barking. It was not the bark of an animal at a coyote or a car. It was steady and low and aimed. 3 notes and a pause, 3 notes and a pause, from out by the round stone shape in the dark. And it did not stop. Wes stood in the doorway with the card in his hand and listened to his dead father's dog call him toward the well as plain as any voice, and the hair came up on his arms. He got the flashlight from the truck. He crossed the yard. The dog quit barking the moment he reached the well and sat down at its lip and watched him. And Wes swore later that the animal looked relieved, the way you look when somebody has finally understood the thing you have been trying to tell them for years. The cover was a disc of old planks weighted with a stone. Wes worked the stone off and dragged the boards back, and the mouth of the well breathed up at him, cold, and it did not smell like a dry hole. Dry holes smell like a river. He picked up a stone the size of an egg. He held it over the black circle. And because some part of him needed to prove the whole thing was a dead man's nonsense before he let himself feel anything at all, he let it go, and he counted, and he waited for the small dry knock of rock hitting the bottom of 40 acres of nothing. The stone fell a long time, longer than 60 feet, longer than the town had ever said that well went. Then, far down in the dark, it did not knock. It splashed. The stone splashed, and Wes did not move for a long time. He knelt at the lip of the well with the flashlight pointed straight down, and all it showed him was his own breath in a circle of wet stone going down past where the light could follow. Water. 60 feet of dry rock. The whole town had said, a joke of a well, a hole his father had wasted his life on. And there was water in it. The dog leaned its shoulder against his arm, and stayed there, warm, and for once did not pull away. "All right," Wes said out loud. To the dog or the well or the dead man, he could not have said which. "All right, I hear you." He did not sleep. He sat up in the cold cabin with the 14 cards spread on the floor and the last one in his hand, reading that one line over and over until the words stopped meaning anything and then started meaning too much. "Everything I owe you is down that well. Go and see." By the time the window went gray, he had decided 2 things. He was not signing his uncle's papers, and he was not going down a 60-foot hole alone with an $1,100 truck, and a flashlight, because he wanted to live to find out what his father had left him. So at 7 in the morning, he was back on the cracked vinyl stool, and Marlene took one look at his face and put the coffee down without being asked. "You look like a man who found something," she said. "I need to get down that well." Wes said, "My father's well. Who around here would know how? Who did he trust?" Marlene went still with the pot in her hand. Then she set it on the burner and leaned both forearms on the counter and looked at him with a different kind of attention than she had shown him the day before. "There's exactly one man," she said. "Cyrus. He drilled half the wells in this valley before his hips gave out. He and your daddy were thick as thieves the last decade or so. He's the one been driving up to feed that dog of yours, though he'd deny it to your face." She wrote an address on a napkin in pencil. "You tell him I sent you, and you be gentle with him. He took Hollis passing harder than the brother did, and that's the God's truth." Cyrus lived 4 miles out in a house with 3 dead trucks in the yard and 1 live. One he came to the door before Wes could knock. A big stooped man in his 70s with hands that looked carved out of rootwood and eyes gone pale at the rims. He looked at Wes for a long moment and something went across his face and settled. "You've got his jaw," Cyrus said. "Come in off the step then. You'll be wanting to see the well." "How'd you know that?" "Because there's nothing else up on that rock worth a young man's trouble," Cyrus said. "And because Hollis told me not long before he passed that when the day came you'd come asking about the well, and I was to help you and not ask too many questions." He turned into the house. "Coffee's on." "He didn't tell me why. Your daddy never told anybody the whole of anything, but he told me that." Wes sat at a kitchen table older than he was and drank coffee he did not want and finally said the thing out loud. "There's water in it. I dropped a stone last night. It splashed." Cyrus did not look surprised, which surprised Wes. The old man just nodded slowly and turned his mug in a circle on the table. "Course there is," he said quietly. "There always was. That's the joke of it, son. That whole valley calls that a dry well." He shook his head. "A dry well is just a well that's keeping a secret, and your daddy was the best keeper of secrets I ever met in my life. You knew? You knew there was water up there and you let this town laugh at him." "I knew he went down that hole most days for the better part of 11 winters, Cyrus said. "I knew he came up filthy and quiet and would not say one word about it. I figured it was grief. His wife took his boy and left, and then his knees went, and then his heart started skipping. And a man like that, alone, I figured he was down there because the dark suited him better than the daylight did." He met Wes's eyes. "I did not know what he was building. He never showed me. And if you'd told me there was a lie that big under that ground, I'd have called you a fool. So let's you and me go find out together, because I have wanted to know ever since and I was too respectful of the man to go looking." They loaded Cyrus's live truck with gear out of a shed that smelled of grease and old rope. A steel tripod, a hand winch oiled and sound, a canvas harness gone soft with age, and a coil of new rope Cyrus made a point of buying that morning, because he said he would trust old rope with his own neck, but not with his friend's boy. Up on the rise, the dog met the truck, and would not leave the wellhead, circling and whining. And when Cyrus stepped down, he stopped and stared at the animal. "That's Moss," Cyrus said. "Your daddy's dog. Named him for the only green thing that'll grow on rock. 8 now, or 9. He crouched slow with his hips, and held out one rootwood hand, and the dog that had let no one touch it walked straight up and put its head under his palm." Cyrus's throat worked. "He's been guarding that hole like it's got a body in it. Maybe he knows something we don't. Dogs mostly do." They set the tripod over the mouth and rigged the winch. Cyrus checked every knot twice and then a third time. He clipped the harness on Wes himself, cinched it, and put a headlamp on him and a second one in his pocket, and clipped a radio to his chest. "Rule is you talk to me the whole way down," Cyrus said. "You go quiet. I pull you up whether you like it or not. Water in the bottom means bad air can pool. You feel dizzy, you feel your head go light, you say so, and you do not argue." He gripped Wes by both shoulders, and for a second he was not looking at Wes at all. "Your daddy would skin me if I let anything happen to you down his own well. So don't." Wes stepped over the lip, and Cyrus took his weight on the winch, and the ground swallowed him a foot at a time. The light went first. 10 feet down, and the circle of morning above him shrank to a coin, and the walls closed in cold and wet, and close enough to touch on every side. The stones were old and hand-laid and green with slime near the top. 20 feet, 30. He called out the depth by the knots Cyrus had tied in the rope, and the old man called back each time, steady, unhurried. The air changed. It got heavier and started to smell of iron and river. At 40 feet, the character of the stone changed under his boots where they scraped the wall, and Wes stopped and shone the lamp close. Up above, the well was rough field rock stacked any old way. Down here it was cut, squared, fitted so tight he could not have slid a knife blade between the courses. Mortarless, every stone chosen and shaped by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. "Cyrus," he said into the radio, "it's built down here. Somebody cut every one of these stones by hand. A pause, then the old man's voice. Gone rough. Keep going, slow. At 60 feet, his boots touched a ledge, and he was not hanging over water anymore. He was standing on a floor. A flat shelf of fitted stone stuck out from the wall of the well, wide enough for 2 men, dry as a plate, and the well shaft went on down past it into black water that he could hear moving somewhere below. A low, steady swallow of a sound. Water going somewhere with purpose. And in the wall behind the shelf, where 60 feet of solid earth had no business holding anything at all, there was a doorway. It was low and square and framed in cut stone, a lintel across the top of a single long slab, and it was black past the frame. Wes stood on the shelf 60 feet under his own dead land and shone his lamp through a door his father had built into the middle of the earth, and his hands were not steady. "There's a door," he said into the radio. His voice came out small. "Cyrus, there's a door down here." The radio hissed. For a moment, the old man did not answer at all. When he did, his voice was thick. "Then I expect you'd best go through it, son." That's what he left it there for. Wes unclipped enough slack and ducked under the lintel. The lamp swung across a room, and the room caught the light and held it, and Wes forgot how to breathe. It was a chamber the size of the cabin above. The walls were the same fitted dry stone, curving up to a low arched ceiling that had held back the whole weight of the hill without a single beam. The air was dry and still and cool. Along one wall ran a workbench, plank-topped, and above it hung tools on nails, chisels, and hammers and steel points, each one worn bright at the working end and set back in its place. There was a chair. A real chair, wood, the seat polished pale by years of one man sitting in it. There was a lantern on the bench and a box of matches beside it, and Wes struck one with a shaking hand and lit the wick, and the whole room bloomed gold. And then he saw the walls, and he had to put a hand on the bench to stay standing. They were covered in the maps, not the pencil drafts tacked up in the cabin. These were the finished things, inked, careful, huge, sheet joined to sheet, and now that he was standing inside the man's real work, Wes could half read them where he could not before. They were the land seen sideways. The hill cut open like a loaf, layer under layer going down, and through every layer ran the same blue line, traced and retraced, curving in from somewhere off to the east, and pooling right under where Wes stood. Arrows, numbers, depths. And across the top of the largest sheet, in his father's pressed hard capitals, 4 words: "The whole valley's drinks." On the bench, weighted flat under a smooth river stone, sat a leather journal. Wes sat down in his dead father's chair because his legs would not hold him, and he picked up the journal and he opened it to the first page, and the lantern threw his shadow tall against the maps of the water while he read. The first entry had a date going back better than a decade. The hand was the same one from the birthday cards, hard and plain, a man who had not been taught to write easy. "Today I proved it," the first line said. "I have suspected it for years, and today I proved it with my own eyes and the dye I ordered from the college. The spring under the upper 40 is not a little seep like Daddy always said. It is the mouth of the whole thing. Every well in this valley, the bottom place, the town, all of them, they are drinking water that comes up first right here under my feet before it ever runs down to them. I put the green dye in my spring at dawn. By dark it came out Garrett's stock tank a mile down the hill and the town fountain by the church the next morning. They none of them know it. The good land does not have the water. The water has always been up here on the rock nobody wanted, on the worthless piece, on mine." Wes read it twice. He looked up at the blue line running down the wall to a little square marked with his uncle's name, and he understood the maps all at once, the whole 11-winter argument of them, and the cold that went through him had nothing to do with the well. He turned the page. "They laugh at me for the dry well," the next entry said. "Let them. A dry well that a man keeps dry on purpose is the safest thing in the world. Nobody covets a dry hole. Nobody sends a lawyer up a hill for cracked dirt. I have capped the spring and run it down into the rock where I built the room, and up top it reads dry as bone. And that is exactly how I want it to read until the day it needs to read otherwise. Because I learned young in this family what happens to a thing when the wrong coil knows it is worth something." And then, 3 pages on, in a harder hand, pressed so deep the pen had torn the paper in 2 places, Wes found the thing that turned his whole life over. "The year Daddy was dying," the entry said, "Garrett brought papers to the hospital and put a pen in his hand when the morphine had him and I was 3 counties away burying my wife's mother. When I got back it was done and signed and witnessed by Garrett's own man. Garrett got the bottom, 300 acres of the best ground in the county, and I got the upper 40 in the dry well, and Daddy was in the ground and could not say different. Everybody said poor Hollis, got the rock, always was the slow brother. Let them. My brother signed the good ground out from under a dying man to get the water he thought was under it. He got the land. He never once guessed the water wasn't bare. It was up here. It was always up here. And one day it is going to belong to my boy. Wes sat very still in the chair, 60 feet under the ground. Then his eye caught something he had walked right past. Propped against the base of the lantern, angled so a man in this chair would see it every time he raised his head from the bench, stood a photograph in a dime store frame. The glass had a water spot in one corner that nobody had ever wiped clean. Wes picked it up. It was his father, younger, dark-haired, standing in front of the cabin up top in some better year. In the crook of one big arm, he held a baby wrapped in a blanket. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking down at the baby like the camera was not even there. Wes turned it over, on the back, in pencil, in that same hard hand. Wesley, 8 months. My whole reason. Wes held the picture in one hand and the journal in the other and did the arithmetic he had spent his whole life refusing to do. A man had sat in this chair, in the cold and the dark, under the earth, over a decade of days with that photograph in front of him the entire time. His uncle's warm hand was still on his shoulder from the day before. His uncle's easy voice was still in his ear. Family price, let me take the burden off you. Don't sign anything for anybody else. We keep it family. And the truth of it came up through him cold and clear as the water running under the floor. That was not a grieving uncle helping his brother's boy. That was a man who had cheated one coil already and had driven up a hill in a working truck to do it again, fast, before the boy could learn what he was holding. Wes, the radio crackled against his chest, and Cyrus's voice came down 60 feet of stone, worried. Son, you've gone quiet on me. You talk to me right now or I start pulling. Wes opened his mouth and found he had to try twice before the words would come. Cyrus, he said, my father wasn't the slow brother. He looked up at the blue line, at the 4 words above it, at 11 winters of one stubborn man's work holding back a hill and a lie all at once. He was the only one of them who knew where the water was, and he kept it dry for me. Cyrus pulled him up out of the ground a foot at a time, and when Wes came over the lip into the daylight, the old man took one look at the journal clutched against his chest and did not say a word. He helped Wes out of the harness. He sat him down on the stone lip of the well. Then he waited, because he was a man who understood that some things have to be handed over and cannot be pulled. Wes gave him the photograph first. Cyrus held it in both rootwood hands and looked at it a long time. And his chin worked, and he set it down careful on his knee. Then Wes gave him the journal and pointed him to the page with the torn paper, and he read it, and Wes watched a whole friendship rearrange itself behind the old man's eyes. He never told me, Cyrus said finally, low. 11 winters we drank coffee at that counter, and he never once told me his own brother put a pen in a dying man's hand. He wiped his mouth. I always figured Garrett got the bottom because Garrett was Garrett, all handshake and teeth, and Hollis let him have it because Hollis never fought for anything in his life. He looked up, and there was water in the pale eyes. And the whole time your daddy was sitting on the one thing worth more than the whole rest of the county put together, and letting them call him the slow one, on purpose, to keep it safe for a boy who wasn't even here. There's more, Wes said. In the trunk, there's a packet. The packet was oilcloth tied with waxed string, dry as everything else in that dry room, and inside it were papers. Wes did not understand most of them at first. Cyrus did. He spread them on the tailgate of his truck and went through them slow with one thick finger, and the more he read the straighter he stood. Son, he said, do you know what you're holding? Tell me. Water in this country doesn't belong to whoever's land it's under. It belongs to whoever claimed it first and put it to use. Cyrus tapped the top sheet. First in time, first in right. That's the whole law of it out here. Older than the state, and your daddy filed a claim on that spring 2 decades back, recorded it proper, dated, witnessed. Says right here he put it to beneficial use, watering stock, and here's the receipts to prove he ran cattle on this rock the one season he needed to, just to make the claim stick. The old man's voice had gone quiet with wonder. 2 decades back, Wes. You know what your uncle did a few summers later, when the rain started coming up short? He drilled those big deep wells down on the bottom. 400 feet. Cost him a fortune. Everybody in the valley was proud of him for it. And every one of those wells is younger than your daddy's claim. Cyrus looked at him. Junior to it. By law, when the water runs short and somebody senior calls for it, the junior wells shut down first. Your uncle's whole green empire, all that hay, all that cattle, it runs on water that your father spoke for 2 decades before Garrett ever put a bit in the ground. He folded the papers with enormous care. Hollis didn't just hide a spring down that hole. He hid the deed to the whole valley's throat, and he filed it in your name before you could walk. Wes sat with that. Below them, the bottomland ran green and wet in the noon sun, sprinklers throwing their silver, and for the first time it did not look to him like a garden he had been cheated out of. It looked like a thing that was borrowing without knowing it. Why now, though? Wes said slowly. Why would any of this matter now? He could have told the town this any day for 11 winters. Cyrus's face changed. Because it never had to matter before, he said. There was rain enough for everybody, so the water stayed a secret, and nobody got hurt. But you've been in the city, boy. You haven't seen what this last stretch has done to us. He swept a hand at the brown hills. 3 summers now with no runoff to speak of. Wells failing all up and down this valley. The little places, the old widows on their acres, folks who can't afford to chase the water down 400 feet. The town put itself on rationing in May. Church well came up sand last month. His jaw tightened. And your uncle's answer has been to drill deeper and pump harder than anybody, which drops the water lower, which dries out every small well around him faster. Garrett is surviving this drought by taking the last of it out from under his neighbor's feet. And now his own new wells are starting to cough air. And he is scared, and a scared man with debts does desperate things. Like drive up a hill to buy a dry well off his brother's kid before the kid finds out it isn't dry. Like exactly that, Cyrus said. They drove into town that afternoon, and Wes learned the rest of it in a lawyer's office over the hardware store. A small room with a window unit rattling and a wall of files gone yellow. The lawyer was an old man himself, older than Cyrus. And when Wes said his name and put the oilcloth papers on the desk, the lawyer took off his glasses and set them down and looked at Wes for a moment like he was seeing a ghost square his debts. So he was right, the lawyer said softly. He always said you'd come. I filed that claim for your father 2 decades back, and I have renewed it quiet every cycle since out of a retainer he paid me in cash. And every year I thought, the poor stubborn fool, sitting on a piece of paper for a spring nobody will ever need. He shook his head slowly. He was not a fool. He was the only man in this valley who saw the dry years coming, and he made sure that when they came, the water would belong to the one person he trusted to do right by it. You. Wes walked back out onto the main street into a town he was starting to see with new eyes. The rationing signs in the store windows, the brown yards, a woman filling plastic jugs from a tank on a trailer because her own tap ran dry. He had come here 3 days ago carrying nothing but a grudge, and now he was carrying the valley's water in an oilcloth packet under his arm, and the weight of it scared him more than being broke ever had. That evening he went back to Marlene's counter because it was the one place in the town that had felt like anything, and because he had a question only a woman who had watched this whole valley from behind that counter most of her life could answer. The cafe was half full and much too quiet. A hand-lettered sign by the register said, "Odd days and even days now, please. Water only." At the far end of the counter, an old woman in a church dress sat over a cup of coffee she was not drinking, and Wes heard her tell Marlene that her well had come up mud that morning. Her husband had dug that well by hand the year they married, she said, and she did not know where an old woman was supposed to find 400 feet of new pipe money. Marlene came down the counter and set a cup in front of Wes without asking. "You see her," she said low. "That's how it goes now. Half my regulars. The big outfits drill deeper and the little folks just run dry and get scared and old all at once." She looked at him hard. "You've got the look he used to get, like you're hauling something too heavy to set down. You going to tell me what's up on that rock?" "Not yet," Wes said. "Marlene, my father. All these dry summers, folks failing all around him. Did he ever say a word? Did he ever once let on he could help?" The old woman's face went still. "No," she said slowly. "And I'll be honest, I held it against him. Man had a whole hill to himself and never lifted a finger while the town went thirsty." She wiped a counter that was already clean. "But he'd sit right where you're sitting and watch scared people come through that door, and he'd go quiet, and he'd leave too much money and drive back up that hill looking like a man at war with his own self. I never once understood it." She studied Wes. "I'm starting to think he wasn't ignoring us at all. I think he was waiting for something, or for somebody." Wes could not answer that and did not try, but he left too much money on the counter when he stood to go, and he watched Marlene watch him do it, and neither one of them said another word about it. He wanted to see it. That was the thing that would not leave him alone. He had read about the spring and stood in the room built to hide it, but he had not seen the water his father died keeping, and until he did, none of it would be real. So at first light, the next morning he and Cyrus went back down the well. Both of them this time, the old man's hips be damned. And behind the chamber they found the last thing. A short tunnel, hand-cut, ending at a wall of fitted stone with an iron valve set into the base of it, greased and cared for and waiting. A cap. Everything above it read dry. Everything behind it, Wes could hear now that he was listening for it, was the low, patient sound of an ocean, under a hill. "He ran it down and around and back into the deep rock," Cyrus murmured, running his hand over the stonework, fed his own spring back into the ground so quiet the whole valley kept drinking it, and never knew where it came from. That is the finest piece of waterwork I have ever seen in my life, and no man will ever get to admire it but us. He looked at Wes. You want to open it? Wes put both hands on the valve. It was cold. He thought of the man in the chair and the birthday cards in the cardboard box, and my whole reason penciled on the back of a photograph, and he turned the iron wheel, and it gave. Water came up into the tunnel around their boots, clear and so cold it burned, rising to their ankles and then finding the old channels his father had cut and running off down them with a sound like the hill itself letting out a breath it had held for 11 winters. Wes crouched down and put his hand in it and brought it to his mouth. It tasted of iron and stone and cold, and it tasted like the one clear memory he had, the smell of well water on a big rough hand on the back of his neck. And he was not aware that he was crying until Cyrus put a hand on his shoulder. Your daddy wasn't hiding from this town, the old man said quietly. You understand that now. He was hiding something for you. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference in the world. If you have made it this far into Wes Coyle's story, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you, the part where a young man had to decide what a secret his father died for was actually worth, and to who. Because knowing what he had was one thing. Wes was about to learn that other people knew too, and had been waiting on this land a good deal longer than he had. They came up out of the well near midday, wet to the knees and lit up like men who had seen something holy, and there was a car in the yard that had not been there before, a clean, small crossover. City clean, parked beside Cyrus's truck. A young woman stood next to it with her arms crossed, watching Moss, who had planted himself between her and the well and was showing her the teeth he had left. She was maybe 19. She had Garrett's height and Garrett's coloring, and none of Garrett's ease. When she saw Wes come up out of the ground, she flinched, and then she made herself stand still. You're Wesley, she said. I'm Britt. Garrett's my dad. She swallowed, which makes you my cousin, I guess, though nobody in my house ever said your name out loud except like a bad word. Then I expect your dad sent you, Wes said. He was too tired to be gentle about it. No. She said it fast and hard. No, he doesn't know I'm here, and if he finds out he will lose his mind. She glanced at the well, at Wes's soaked boots, at the journal Cyrus was carrying, and her face pulled tight, then came apart. You've been down there. You found it. Oh God, you found whatever's down there. Found what, exactly? What is it you think I found? Britt pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a second, and when she took them away, she looked younger and more scared. 2 weeks ago, a man came to the house. A hydrologist, Dad called him. They spread maps on the kitchen table and I brought them coffee and I heard them. Her voice dropped. The man told my father that the whole aquifer, the water everybody's been fighting over, it recharges through one point. And that point is up here. On this 40. On the piece. Everybody's laughed at my whole life. She looked sick. And my dad said, and I heard him say it, he said, then I need to own that dirt before the boy figures out what he's standing on. He said it about you. 2 days before your father was even in the ground. The yard went quiet except for the water Wes could still hear running somewhere under all of them now. He offered to buy it off me for family price, Wes said. I know he did. I saw the papers on his desk. Britt's chin came up, and for the first time she looked Wes dead in the eye. I came up here because I couldn't sit in that house one more day knowing what he's about to do to you and pretending I didn't. My father is a good man in a lot of ways, Wesley. He really is. But he wants this water so bad it's turned into something I don't recognize. And he's not going to stop at asking nice. She looked over her shoulder down the hill, and her voice went thin. And I think he already knows you've been in the well. Because I told him you turned down his offer. And this morning before I left, he was on the phone with the drilling company, and he was smiling. Smiling about what? Wes said. What can a drill crew do to me? This is my land now. It is. That's the trouble. Britt hugged herself against a cold that was not in the air. For weeks, Dad's been telling anybody who'll listen that the town's one hope is a new deep well up here on the high ground, and that his grieving nephew won't return his calls. He is going to drive up here with a crew and a hydrologist, and the whole valley thanking him, and start punching holes in your dirt to hit that water, and he'll call it saving everybody. She looked at Wes, and her eyes were wet and steady at once. And if you try to stop him, you'll be the selfish city boy who sat on a spring while the widows went dry. That's the thing my father is good at, Wesley. He doesn't take what's yours. He makes it so the whole world thinks you're the villain for keeping it. Down the long green slope, faint and getting less faint, came the sound of a heavy diesel engine climbing the grade. And behind it, another, and the flat clank of something big and steel being hauled up the only road onto the dry 40. Moss came off the wellhead and stood in the middle of the yard facing the sound, and began, low in his chest, to growl. Two trucks came over the rise and a flatbed behind them hauling a drill rig folded down like a sleeping insect, and Garrett stepped out of the lead truck smiling before the dust had even settled. He had 3 men with him in company coveralls and a fourth in a clean shirt carrying a roll of maps, and he came across the yard with his arms a little open, the host of his own arrival. "Wesley," he called. "Now, I know how this looks, but you would not answer your phone, son, and this valley cannot wait on a young man's grief. We are going to do a real good thing here today." "Get your rig off my land," Wes said. Garrett stopped, still smiling, and spread his hands wider. "That is exactly the attitude I was afraid of. Look around you. That town down there is dying of thirst. My man here has the science that says the water this whole valley needs is under this very ground, and you are going to stand on a porch and say no to your own neighbors." He shook his head, sorrowful and warm. "I am trying to save people, son. I would think you would want to help me do it instead of sitting up here alone with a dog in a hole." It was a good speech. Wes could feel how good it was, how it turned him into the selfish one in front of the crew, how it would sound repeated in town. He looked at the men in coveralls, who would not meet his eyes, and at the man with the maps, and at his uncle's open, generous, lying face. And he understood that Britt had told him the truth about the one thing her father was best at. "You're right that the water's up here," Wes said. "You've been right about that for 2 weeks, since a hydrologist sat at your kitchen table and told you. What you don't know is that I've been 60 feet down that dry well." He watched the smile go stiff. "I've been in the room my father built. I've read what he wrote, and I know what you did to Granddad in that hospital to get the bottomland." The yard went dead quiet. One of the coverall men looked up. "I don't know what you think you found," Garrett said, and the warmth was draining out of his voice by the second. "But a sick man's ramblings in a hole are not going to change one fact about who owns what in this county." "No," said a voice from the porch, "but this will." The lawyer had come. He was standing in the cabin doorway where he had been the whole time, an old man in a wrinkled suit with the oilcloth packet open in his hands, and he came down the steps slow and stood beside Wes and held up a single yellowed page so the crew could see it had a county seal. 2 decades ago, Hollis Coyle filed a claim on the spring under this ground and put the water to use and recorded it lawful, the lawyer said. And his voice out here was dry and carrying. That makes his claim the oldest on this water by 2 decades. "Garrett, your deep wells down on the bottom are junior to it. Every one of them. He let that land. Water does not care whose name is on the deed. But the law surely does, and your brother made certain the law did too, a long time before you ever thought to come up this hill." The man in the clean shirt with the maps under his arm cleared his throat. "Mr. Coyle," he said, and it took Wes a second to understand he meant Garrett, not him. "You told me this parcel was uncontested. Nobody drills into a senior water right. That is how a company loses its license." He was already stepping back toward the flatbed. "You want to settle who owns this water. You do it in a courthouse, not with my rig sitting on top of it." Garrett stared at the page. Wes watched his uncle do the arithmetic, the same arithmetic Wes had done in the chair underground, and watched it come out the other way for him. Not the boy at his mercy. Him at the boy's. Every green acre, every head of cattle, every payment on those 400-foot wells, all of it running on water that a court would say belonged first to the nephew he had driven up here to fleece. "You can't," Garrett said. It came out quiet. "Do you have any idea what I owe against that operation? If those wells get called, I am finished. A lifetime of building gone. Over a piece of paper my brother filed to spite me." "He didn't file it to spite you," Wes said. "He filed it the year I was born, before there was any drought, before there was anything to fight over. He filed it because he already knew you'd take whatever you found out was worth taking, and he wanted the one thing you'd never think to look for to be safe for his kid." Wes felt his own voice shake and let it. "He didn't hate you, Garrett. He just never once trusted you. And now I know why." For a moment, the big man had nothing. The host was gone out of him. He looked older and smaller, and he looked past Wes at the round stone lip of the well where Moss stood guard. And when he spoke again, it was almost to himself. "I got the good ground," Garrett said. "I fought my whole life for the good ground. And I got it. And I still ended up thirsty." And he sat up here on the rock we all laughed at with the only water that ever mattered. He let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. "God. He beat me, and he let me spend my whole life thinking I'd won." "Daddy." Britt had come out from beside her car and her face was wet, and she walked right past Wes to stand in front of her father where the crew could hear. "I heard you, 2 weeks ago in the kitchen. I heard the man tell you where the water was, and I heard you say you had to own this dirt before Wesley figured out what he was standing on, and you said it 2 days before Uncle Hollis was even buried." Her voice broke and held. "I have been sick about it every day since. I'm not going to stand in that house and watch you do to him what you did to Granddad. I won't. If that costs me, then it costs me. Garrett looked at his daughter as though she had struck him. Whatever he had been about to say, he did not say it. He turned and looked at the crew, at the coverall men studying their boots, at the man with the maps already rolling them back up, and the fight went out of him. He waved a hand at the rig. Tired, done. Loaded up, he said. We're not drilling here today. The trucks turned around in the yard and went back down the hill, the folded rig swaying behind them, and the dry 40 was quiet again except for the wind and the sound, if you knew to listen for it now, of water moving under the ground. Britt did not go with them. She stood in the yard with her arms wrapped around herself and watched her father's trucks disappear over the rise, and afterward she looked like a girl who had set fire to her own house on purpose and could not yet feel the heat of it. "He won't speak to me for a good while," she said. "My mother either, probably. I keep waiting to feel bad, and I just don't. Is that a terrible thing?" "No," Wes said. He came and stood beside her, and the half-wild dog that trusted almost nobody crossed the yard and leaned against her leg, and she put a hand down into the fur without seeming to notice she was doing it. "You did the one honest thing anybody in this family's done in a long time. He really did love your dad, I think. Mine." Britt wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "He talked about your father for as long as I can remember, like a wound that never healed over. I don't think he even knew it was envy. I think he told himself it was pity." She looked at the round stone lip of the well. Turns out he spent his life pitying the one man who had everything. They stood there a while, the two of them, the last two coils under 30, cousins who had grown up 90 miles and a whole lie apart, and a quiet came up between them that neither one had the words for, and neither one tried to name. Wes thought that was the hard part. He was 20, and he had never done anything harder than stand on that porch, and he thought the hard part was behind him. He was wrong. The hard part came the next evening, and it did not come with a drill rig. It came in a rented sedan, wearing a soft gray jacket and a good watch, with a leather folder and a pen. The man introduced himself as being from a company that bottled spring water, and he had heard, news traveled that young Mr. Coyle had come into a rather remarkable water resource, and he wanted to make Wes's life very simple. He sat at the plank table where Hollis had penciled his maps, and he laid out a number, and then, when Wes did not move, a bigger number. "I'll be direct because I respect you." The man said, "I did my homework on the drive up. You are 20, you work nights loading trucks, and you drive something held together with wire. Your father sat on this his whole life and died broke in a cabin with a dirt floor. That is not devotion, Mr. Coyle. That is a man who could not get out of his own way." He tapped the paper gently. "I am offering you the door he never walked through. No fight with your uncle. No court. No neighbors at your fence with their hands out. Sign this, and by Friday every one of your problems belongs to somebody else." "And the town," Wes said, "the widow whose well came up mud. In your version, where does she get her water?" The man's smile did not move. "We sell it back to her. That is the business, son. Everybody pays for water. The only question anyone has ever had to answer is who they pay." He held the pen out again. "Today, that could be you." It was more money than Wes had ever let himself imagine. Enough to erase the $1,100 truck and the night shifts and the whole small scraping life he had come from. Exclusive rights to the spring. A lease that ran 2 decades. Wes could sign the paper and drive back to the city rich and never think about drought or brothers or wells again. And the man in the gray jacket smiled and uncapped the pen and slid it across the boards where the maps had been. Wes looked at the pen a long time. He thought about a pen put into a dying man's hand in a hospital bed. He thought about the widow in the church dress who could not find pipe money, and the town on odd days and even days, and the church well coming up sand. And he thought about 11 winters, and a man who could have sold this water any day of his life to anybody, and had instead fed it back into the ground and kept himself poor so it would still be here, clean and free for the people down the hill who had laughed at him. His father could have been rich too. That was the thing Wes understood, sitting there with the pen an inch from his hand. His father had been offered this exact temptation, in one form or another, every single day for over a decade, and had said no to it every single day alone in the dark, for a boy who wasn't even there to see him do it. "No," Wes said, and slid the pen back. "It's not for sale. Not to you, not for any number. This water belongs to the valley it comes up under. My father spent his whole life making sure of it, and I'm not going to undo that in an afternoon for a check." The man in the gray jacket packed his folder and left without another word. And Wes sat alone in the cabin and shook for a while. Not from doubt, but from the size of what he had just turned down and the certainty, all the way to the bottom of him, that he had turned it down right. When his hands were steady again, he took the last birthday card out of his jacket, the one meant for a birthday 4 months off that his father had not lived to give him, and he read the line one more time in the lantern light. "Everything I owe you is down that well. Go and see." He understood it now in a way he had not 3 nights back on the floor of this same cabin. It had never been about money hidden in a hole. The man had been trying to hand him proof. Proof that his father had thought about him every single day, down there in the dark, and had spent himself to the bone making sure his boy would inherit the one thing no brother could sign away and no company could ever buy. He went to town the next morning and found Marlene at her counter and told her, finally, all of it: the spring, the chamber, the claim, the offer, and the no. She listened without once picking up her coffee pot. And when he finished, she came around the end of the counter, which he had never seen her do, and she took his face in both flour-dusted hands. "He spent 11 years underground," she said, and her eyes were streaming and her voice was steady, "so that you would never have to look up at anybody. Do you hear me? That is what your father did. And you just proved he spent them on the right boy." Word went through the valley like water through cracked ground, fast and everywhere at once. By that afternoon, there were trucks parked along the fence line of the dry 40, and it was not a drill crew. It was neighbors. The old woman in the church dress. Ranchers who had never once spoken to a coil without pity in it. They stood at the fence, not sure they were allowed in, and Wes walked out to them with Cyrus on one side and Moss on the other. And an old man he did not know took off his cap and said they had heard the coil boy had water, and they did not want charity. They only wanted to know if there was a way, any way, that a body could buy a little time until the rains came back. Wes climbed up onto the stone lip of the well so they could all see him, the same lip where Moss had kept his long watch, and found to his own surprise that he was not afraid. "My father knew about this water for over a decade," he called out to the fence line. "He could have sold it. He could have gotten rich, or gotten even with the brother who cheated him. Instead, he kept it a secret and kept himself poor. And I grew up on the other side of the state believing that made him a fool." His voice carried out over the brown ground. "I was wrong about the man, and I do not intend to be wrong about you. This water is not for sale, and it is not charity either. We are going to do it as he would have wanted, so that nobody in this valley ever has to stand at a fence again wondering whether they are allowed to drink." Cyrus had taken his cap off. Marlene had driven up from town and stood at the back of the little crowd with her hand pressed over her mouth. Nobody said anything for a moment. Under all their feet, patient in the dark rock, the water Hollis Coyle had saved kept moving toward them exactly as he had arranged. And Wes looked at the fence full of frightened, dignified, thirsty people his father had watched suffer and quietly planned to save. And he knew, the whole shape of it arriving at once, exactly what he was going to build. By the next spring, the dry 40 was not dry anymore, and the town had quit calling it the dry 40 at all. What Wes built was not a bottling plant and not a fortune. It was a trust. He sat down with the old lawyer over the hardware store, and they wrote it plain enough that a tired man loading trucks at night could understand every line of it. The water that came up under the upper place belonged, first and forever, to the valley it had always fed. No one could sell it. No one could own it out from under anybody. A board of neighbors would decide each dry season how it got shared. The small places first, the widows and the old men who could not chase water down 400 feet, and then everyone else in turn. They put a name at the top of the paper. "The Hollis Coyle Water Trust," Cyrus cried when he read it and pretended it was his hip. Wes stayed. That surprised the town more than the water did. The city boy who came to sign papers and sell had patched the cabin roof instead, and shored the porch, and let Cyrus teach him the valley as his father had known it, one aquifer and one broken windmill at a time. Cyrus was up there most mornings now, coffee in a thermos, and the two of them would walk the pipe the neighbors had helped lay from the spring down to the failing places, checking the joints. And he would tell Wes one more story about Hollis that the boy had never gotten to live. The town well came back in April. When the water rose clean in it again, somebody hung a hand-painted sign at the church that just said thank you, and did not say to who, because by then the whole valley knew. The first tap Wes turned back on himself was the old woman's in the church dress. He and Cyrus ran the last length of pipe to her place on a Saturday, and half the valley came out to help dig the trench, and when Wes opened the valve at her spigot, the water coughed twice and then ran clear and cold and did not quit. The old woman put her hand under it. Then she put her wet hand over her mouth and could not speak. Her husband had dug her a well by hand the year they married, and it had failed her in her old age, and now a boy she had watched come into town with nothing but a grudge had handed it back to her out of a hill everybody had sworn was dead. "I don't have much to pay you," she said when she found her voice. "You don't pay for it. That's the whole point of the thing," Wes told her. "My father built it so a body never has to be thirsty and ashamed at the same time again." He closed her thin hand around the running water. "You just leave your porch light on for the next person who comes looking for this valley when they're low. That's the only bill there is. Garrett was the hardest part, and Wes did not pretend otherwise. His uncle did not come crawling, and Wes would not have believed it if he had. What happened was slower and truer than that. Britt brought them to the same table, up at the cabin, and the two men sat across it a long while, not saying much. Garrett's operation was junior to the trust now, and everyone at the table knew it, and everyone knew Wes could have shut those big wells down in a dry year and let his uncle's green empire burn to dust in the sun as payment for a pen put in a dying man's hand. He did not do it. "You keep pumping," Wes said, "within what the board sets. Same as everybody. Dry years, you cut back with the rest of us. Good years, there's plenty." He slid a paper across the boards, the same boards his father had drawn maps on. "That's the deal my father would have offered you, if you'd ever once given him the chance." Garrett looked at the paper for a long time. "Why?" he said finally. "After what I did, I would not have done this for me." "I know you wouldn't," Wes said. "That's the difference between you and him, and I'd rather be him." He did not say it cruel. He said it like a fact, and a fact does not need heat to be true. The water's not for punishing you, Garrett. It never was for anything small. Sign it. Garrett was quiet a while. "We used to dig together, him and me, when we were boys," he said. "Our daddy would send us out to find water for a new tank. And Hollis, he could always feel it. Just a kid, and he'd stop and say, 'Here, dig here,' and by God, there would be water. I never had the feel for it. I had to buy mine 400 feet down." He looked at the paper, then at his own hands on the table. "I think I hated him for that before I even understood I was doing it, that he could feel the one thing I had to pay for." He picked up the pen. "That is a small and stupid reason to spend a life ruining a brother." Garrett signed it. And a strange thing happened to the man after that. With the weight of the thing he had gotten away with finally set down where everyone could see it, he seemed to stand up straighter than he had in years. He started coming to the trust meetings. He brought his own equipment up the hill to help pipe water to the far places. No charge. And when the county paper wanted the story, it was Garrett who stood in front of them and said plain that his brother Hollis had seen the dry years coming when no one else had, and had saved them all, and that the town owed the memory of a man it had laughed at an apology it could never quite pay. Britt stood beside her father while he said it. She had come to live up at the cabin by then, learning the water alongside Wes, the two last coils under 30 tending the thing the oldest one had left them. Marlene did her honoring a quieter way. She took the water-stained photograph from the chamber, the one of Hollis holding the baby, and had it framed proper and hung it behind her counter, above the stool where the man had eaten the oldest pie in the case every Thursday of his life. Under it, she set a small brass plate. She would not tell anybody what it cost her. When strangers asked who the fellow in the picture was, she would put down her coffee pot and tell them the whole story, and she never told it the same way twice, except for the last line, which never changed. "That was Hollis Coyle," she would say. "This whole valley drank his water for 11 winters and called him a fool for having it. Don't you be the kind of person who only sees a man clearly once he's under the ground." Wes's mother came in June. He had not called her. She heard as people do, and she drove the 90 miles she had sworn she would never drive again. And she stood in the yard beside her small car and looked at the restored cabin, and the green creeping back into the ground, and the dog asleep at the well. And she did not come any closer until Wes came out to her. "You look like him," Dana said. It was not a compliment, and it was not an insult. It was just the thing she had driven all that way to be able to say to his face. "You've got his hands, so people keep telling me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He wrote you," she said. "The first years after we left. Birthday cards. I want you to know that. They came and I sent them back unopened, and when he stopped I told you he never wrote at all." Her voice did not break. She had clearly used it up on the drive. "I was so angry at him for choosing this rock over us that I decided you would be angry too, and I made sure of it. I stole your father from you, Wesley, one birthday at a time, and I told myself I was protecting you." Wes thought about the 14 cards in the cardboard box, the ones that never even got a stamp because a man had learned there was no use mailing what came right back. He thought about "I saw a boy your size at the fair today and had to leave." He found that the anger he had carried up this hill 3 seasons ago was not there anymore. The water had washed the last of it out of him without his ever noticing. "He didn't blame you," Wes said. "He told me so. In the last letter, he said you got me clear of a bitter man and he never once held it against you. He watched that land on his mother and take some terrible weight off her that she had carried longer than he had been alive. I don't hold it against you either, Mama. Come see what he left. Come see what kind of man he really was. I think you earned that, same as me." She stayed 3 days. On the last one, she asked to be lowered down the well, and Cyrus rigged the harness and let her down slow, and she sat a while alone in the room her ex-husband had built 60 feet under the ground. And whatever happened between her and the memory of him down there in the lantern light, she came up quiet and lighter. And she did not say, and Wes did not ask. Before she left, she stood in the cabin doorway and looked at the 14 birthday cards, which Wes had set out along the mantel in order. 7 through 20, a row of numbered years finally allowed to stand in the open. She touched the last one, the one that had sent her son down the well. He always did say things sideways, she said softly. Took me half a lifetime and a dead man to hear him straight. Then she drove the 90-mile home, and she called that Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and slowly it became a thing the two of them did. There had been one last thing in the trunk that Wes had not been able to make himself open. A fat envelope. His name on the front, and under his name a single word. Last. He had carried it in his jacket for weeks, up and down the pipe, through the trust meetings and the confrontation, and the buyer and his mother, waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. The night after Dana drove home, with the cabin quiet and the dog at his feet, Wes finally opened it. It was long. His father had not been a man of many words out loud, but alone, on paper, 60 feet down, it turned out he had found them. Wes read it once fast and once slow, and this is most of what it said. Wesley, by now you have been down the well and up it, and you know what I did and why, so I will not waste this last paper on the maps. They said their piece. I want this one for the thing the maps could not say. Your mother was not wrong to take you. I need you to know that. I was no good to a boy in those years, angry at my brother, married to a hole in the ground. Less money than sense. She got you clear of a bitter man, and I have never blamed her one day for it. Whatever she told you, if you are carrying anger at her, set it down. Life is short, and water is precious, and neither one is served by a grudge. I could not fight Garrett with lawyers. I had no money and he had the whole town, so I fought him the only way a stubborn man knows. I found the thing he wanted most in the world, and I made it look like nothing, and I hid the truth of it down where only my own son would have a reason to go. It cost me my knees and the better part of my heart, and I would do every winter of it again tomorrow. They will tell you I was a failure. A rock, a dry well, a man who died alone. Let them. A failure is a man who had something to give and kept it for himself. I gave you the water under a whole valley, and I gave you proof that your father thought about you every single day he was down in that dark. That is not failure. That is the only kind of rich I ever wanted to be. Be kind with it, son. Water and kindness turned out to be the same thing to me in the end. They both run downhill to the low places, to the folks nobody else remembered, and they both keep alive what would have died without them. Kindness is not the soft thing people take it for. It is the load-bearing thing. It is what the whole rest of a life stands on. My chest is not right tonight and the lantern is getting low, so I have to climb up now. If you are reading this, then you found your way home. That is the only direction I ever cared about pointing you. Your dad, Hollis. Wes sat with the letter in his lap a long time after the lantern in his own hand had guttered low. Outside the mended window, the 40 was dark and, for the first time in his memory of it, alive. The dog got up, circled, and lay back down against his boot. He did not read the letter aloud to anyone, not to Cyrus, not to Britt. Some things a father finally says are for one set of ears only. But the next morning, he walked down to the trust's small meeting and asked the board for one favor. He wanted a single line from it cut into the stone at the wellhead, where every soul who ever came up that hill thirsty would have to pass it. Be kind with it. Water and kindness are the same thing in the end. He understood the whole of it now. A young man comes into the world believing he was handed nothing but a grudge, a name people say with pity, 40 acres of cracked dirt, and a hole everybody laughed at. And then he learns that the nothing was the disguise, that under it a man had spent his one short life burying the only inheritance that mattered so deep and so quiet that no one greedy would ever find it, and that a person does not really inherit land at all. You inherit what somebody was willing to bury for you. In the fall, Wes walked out to the well at dusk, as his father must have 1,000 times. He pried back the cover and looked down at the water 60 feet below, black and cold and moving, on its patient way to every thirsty acre in the valley. Moss came and lay down at the stone lip where he had kept his watch through all the years no one else understood, and put his gray muzzle on his paws, and let out a long breath. Wes stood there in the last of the light and listened to the water his father had loved him enough to hide. Everything I owe you is down that well, the man had written. And he had been telling the truth the whole time, and the whole town had thought he was talking about money, and not one of them, not for 11 winters, had guessed that what a poor stubborn father had buried down that dry well was simply the proof that he had loved his son more than he had loved being understood. Wes slid the cover back over the water, gentle, tucking it down over the dark like something he meant to keep. Then he whistled for the dog, and the two of them walked back up the dark ground toward the one-lit window. Home. which had never been a place and had always been this.